So I'm just taking a break on my hike, and thought I'd do a little bit of a reflection on that poem. I've hiked a while, and let me just get it out here. So the rest of this footnote says, the desperation attendant on moral fallibility is mitigated for me by admitting that the only willed and resolute vigilance may lapse. As with the Apostle Peter's denial that he could be capable of denial. But that failure, disgrace, and even death have now and again been redeemed into inviolatedness by a sufficiently transfigured courage. So that's a mouthful. A lot of big words. But I think that was in her letter to W.R. Bennett and Norman Holmes Pearson Moore said those things. So, about this poem specifically. So, knowing that it took her 8 years to formulate this poem really makes sense, because it is very route with the overtones of quiet Christian belief, and that's and wrestling with those thoughts, which is the interesting part, I think. As she says in lines, I believe it's 7 or 8, we're just going to have to go through this entire poem here. So the beginning, what are years? And then she follows that question, the title, by what is our innocence? What is our guilt? And that line's enjambed. What is our guilt? All our. And that's an interesting use of enjambment. And what I mean by enjambment here is when you take a fragment of a thought or sentence and you kind of cram it into a line. So effectively, it's forcing you to stop in a weird spot in the sentence. What is our innocence? Line 1, comma. What is our guilt? Question mark. All are, A-R-E. So by enjamming that part there, I think she's asking this question. She's really introducing this moral question. What is our innocence? What is our guilt? Because those two things are imperative in a moral standing. We want to know these things. It's just questioning that. All are naked, none is safe. And whence, again, enjambment, that's on the 3rd line. All are naked, none is safe, period. And whence. So again, she uses this enjambment to halt us and stop us from just plowing through here and really ponder upon what she's saying. So all are naked, none are safe. She's saying that, to me at least, we're all the same people, and we're all equal in the fact that any of us can go. We're just not safe. Everybody could die tomorrow. We're all equal. And whence is courage? So this is interesting. So in whence is enjambed on line 3 is courage, is the first two words in line 4, but then there is a colon. So her use of punctuation here really forces you again to stop again. That's outside of all the commas that are in this poem. And the colon also sets us up for some interesting use here. So that line 4 reads, "Is courage the unanswered question? And whence is courage the unanswered question?" So she's really halting us here because she wants us to ponder what courage is, and really think about that these questions, perhaps because of the colon kind of ending that thought, starting a new parallel thought here. The unanswered question, comma, the resolute doubt, comma, again. And this time she uses an M dash after the comma, which is highly grammatically incorrect. But again, to emphasize this pause, this is not a poem that's meant to be read fast. What are the years? The title. Took her 8 years to write. She wants us to ruminate on each one of these words and really dig deep into the meaning, and even criticize the apostrophes and the use of punctuation in itself, on top of just the act of holding you up from reading. Okay, so we're about halfway through the first stanza here. And, you know, there's not much of a rhyme going on, a lot of enjambment. There is innocence and wince, which are kind of a slant rhyme. So these things, you know, I'm just going to read up until this point. What is our innocence? What is our guilt? All are naked, none is safe, and whence is courage? The unanswered question, the resolute doubt, dumbly calling, deftly listening, that in misfortune, even death, encourages others, and in its defeat stirs. So that was the entire stanza. I'm going to pick up on dumbly calling, deftly listening. So that is, I would say that's a little bit of chiasmus going on, where you switch the sounds of words, dumbly calling, deftly listening. And she sets that up with a comma, followed by another M dash, and then enjambs that line with that. So again, she's wanting you to just ruminate on this weird flow she has going here in meter, if you can call it that. It's kind of open verse, really. Dumbly calling, deftly listening, that in misfortune, even death. So again, you know, that in misfortune, and so, you know, the commas, even death, commas, slowing it down, but also telling you, you know, if you're having misfortune, even death, you know, encourages others, just that 1-2 line thing there, in its defeat stirs. So as you can see, this poem, this is the first stanza here, and out of 3, which is, I don't think an accident here. It's very, getting into the woods here. She asks those questions in the first stanza, and she begins the second stanza with some more. So I'll pick up from the first. Encourages others, in its defeat stirs the soul to be strong. So see, she broke this up in a way that makes you stop and think of that stanza one way. But then when you add this next stanza, the first line of it in, it's not it's a complete sentence. So it changes the meaning of the first stanza, or adds to it, however you want to look at that. So the whole, pick up from line 8, I believe, encourages others, and in its defeat stirs the soul to be strong. Enjambment. He, once again, this theme of enjamming is throughout the entirety of the poem. And, by this point, that Moore is doing it for a specific reason, and you can start to formulate a thesis on why that might be. And my thesis is that she thinks that she's using this enjambment as a technique, not only to slow us down and make us think, but to also take the concept of time and play with it with us. The whole poem, what are the years? Again, the title. So it's saying like this enjambment is happening, and it's constantly pushing us, like time never stops. It's kind of rushing us, but again, slowing us down and making us think about things, which is a profound way to think about life. Really think about things, but just know that things are going to get backed up and they're going to get messed up a little bit. So let's move on to the second stanza here. So, encourages others, in its defeat stirs the soul to be strong. He sees deep and is glad, who accedes to mortality. So again, see, she did enjambment again, but now she's, proposes another question here. Really, in the second stanza, and that's kind of a theme with these, at least for the first 2. She's setting this up really well. So, he sees deep and is glad, who accedes to mortality, and in his imprisonment rises upon himself as the sea in a chasm, struggling to be. So as you can see, she uses enjambment throughout that. Her diction, accedes to mortality, upon his imprisonment rises. It's kind of obvious here that there's a pretty direct reference to the resurrection of Christ in here. And building in with this message here, it kind of goes back to what her letter said, that the Apostle Peter's denial, that he could even be capable of denial. And, it kind of, you wouldn't think of that situation or that biblical reference right off the top of your head reading this so far, I don't think. But this starts to add that in there. So, the soul to be strong, he sees deep and is glad, who accedes to mortality, in his imprisonment rises upon himself as the sea in a chasm, struggling to be free and unable to be, in its surrendering finds its continuing. So she ends this stanza with a complete sentence this time. There's a period. So we have to go back and figure out where that is here. So the whole thing is essentially a sentence after that question. stirs the soul to be strong. He sees deep and is glad who accedes to mortality, and in his imprisonment rises upon himself. So here she's talking about him rising and possibly the Holy Spirit in the sea, in a chasm. So like, it's two interesting words that are both vast empty spaces of not necessarily void, because the sea has life, but a chasm is definitely a giant hole. So there's a weird duplexity there, of like duality of the sea being like perceived as empty but having a lot of life, and a chasm possibly the same way if you go back to understanding how cave systems work and the life that's actually in the cave. Interesting. So struggling to be free and unable to be, in its surrendering finds its continuing. So here, I think it's saying like, again, pondering the resurrection and understanding that in order to truly continue in our life, we have to understand the present. Hence the enjambment. She's holding us up so we can get along to this part, which flows a lot better. There isn't much enjambment past line 15. And then the way that slant rhymes, surrendering, continuing, these two things play so well with each other and add a contrast to the enjambment that we've been seeing in the previous stanzas up until this point. So now the third verse, and this is where I think it turns here a little bit. He who is strongly feels behaves, the very bird. So again, she ends that first line of the third stanza with a comma. So he who strongly feels behaves. So this is interesting. This is, I think, her kind of diving into herself here and really pondering maybe the people that really feel the most because they care sincerely for other people behave very well. And the very bird, again, probably talking about this person, kind of anamorphizing him into a bird here, growing taller as he sings, comma, stills his form straight up, period, though he is captive. So again, this enjambment is pretty happening again here. Growing taller as he sings, stills his form straight up. So that's a little bit of iambic. Stills his form straight up. So she's kind of getting into this flow here, and it's very meditative and a little bit longer than a lot of these other stanzas, particularly line 22. So his form straight up, though he is captive, his mighty singing stays. Satisfaction is a lowly thing. How pure a thing is joy, period. So again, it's just talking, rolling on this theme of this bird singing in a cage, and he's captive, but even though that he understands he's captive, the satisfaction in singing alone is a lowly thing. But how pure a thing is that joy that we can share in the moment, reflecting upon the years, and we can just be present. I think a lot of the point of here is just saying, though we do feel strongly, and we as poets and writers and sensitive people in general sometimes, that it does feel like we are kind of a bird in a cage, but at the same time, instead of getting hopeless about that, rejoice in your voice, which is interesting because the singing of a bird is saying to do the essence of what the poet does, the songwriter, the bard, the storyteller. We're supposed to get out there and sing our stories out loud to people, to praise the word. As Christians, we're called to go do that as well. So these things, she's leading up to that. And this is, towards the end of the poem here, line 25. Actually, I'll pick it up at 22 here. His form straight up, though he is captive, his mighty singing stays. Satisfaction is a lowly thing. How pure a thing is joy. This is mortality. This is eternity. And all of this ruminating on those enjambed sentences, or enjambed lines that we've covered, ends in this kind of mimicry of the first, the second stanza, the surrendering, continuing, mortality, eternity. Even up in the first stanza, others defeat stirs. So she's keeping this slant rhyme here in this 3-stanza structure with a rhyme at the end, and kind of open verse the rest of the way through. But this is kind of zooming back out onto the poem as a whole. The form of it, is this very symmetrical thing, which a lot of times symmetry in poetry can mean trying to reach that perfection. And a lot of the old poets talk about that. Yeats, and even before that, a lot of the Christian, early Christian poets, people like that. So it's an interesting thought. But she ends this very definitively. This is mortality. This is eternity. So she's saying, like, this is what it is to be human. This is what it means to live a life. Is what are the years? Like, it's a very pungent way to end the poem by, poignant way to end the poem by saying, kind of looping back around to the initial title. Who's answering that question? What are the years? This is mortality. This is eternity. So she's saying, it's hard to embrace the years, and there's things that we cannot do as humans every day, and it's going to always feel like we're behind and we're in a hurry. We're enjambed, so to speak, literally in the poem. And things are going to get messy. They're going to be spread out. They're not going to rhyme perfectly all the time with the rhyming scheme here. All of these things contribute to, the central message of this poem. The conceit here is this is mortality. This is eternity. So in order to understand eternity and to grasp that eternal life, we must first understand that this is mortal and we are mortal, and humble ourselves for that eternity. That's kind of my reading of this poem. I'd love to go more in depth. I'll probably do eventually I'm going to write an essay about this poem, because I do feel a little deep analysis, maybe an essay cross-referencing some other poets and some other poems of hers into a deeper thesis here. But so I hope you enjoyed my deep reading in nature today. If you didn't get a chance to watch this first video where I read this poem in nature, be sure to check out that one first, or this is going to be super confusing to you, I believe, unless you're familiar with the poem or know it. Again, thank you so much for tuning in today. If you're interested in stuff like this, hit that subscribe button. I also have a Substack, a newsletter that you can join in the description if you feel so inclined. Looking forward to it, and you have a wonderful day. Adios.